Determine the inverse of f of x if f of x equals x plus 1 over x plus 2. So if I'm trying to find the inverse, I need to understand that f of x can be rewritten as y. And the first step when finding the inverse equation is to switch x and y. That means every time you see an x, you're going to put a y. And every time you see a y, you're going to put an x. I just switched them. So instead of y equals, I have x equals. Instead of x plus 1, I have y plus 1. Instead of x plus 2, I have y plus 2. From there, I always have to multiply by the denominator if I have a fraction and I have a variable that I'm trying to solve for in the fraction. I need to get y by itself. My goal is to solve for y. Y is in the fraction. I need to multiply by the denominator. My denominator in this case is a y plus 2. So I'm going to multiply both sides by a y plus 2. They'd cancel out over there, and I'd be left with yx plus 2 because I have to distribute my x equals y plus 1. Again, I multiply by my denominator, and when I multiplied x by my denominator of y plus 2, it becomes yx plus 2x. This step, you'll need to put all of your y's on one side. I prefer to put them to my left. It doesn't matter. And you'll need everything else on the other side of your equal sign. So I'm going to minus y from both sides. I'm going to minus y from both sides. So I can end up with a yx minus y plus 2x equals y. Oops, actually, don't have a y anymore. Equals 1. So now that I have all my y's, this has a y, this has a y. I have all my y's on one side, but I have that 2x on the same side with my y's. I need it gone. I'll end up with a yx minus y equaling negative 2x plus 1. Now that I have all my y's on one side of the equal sign, I can factor out my y. When I factor out a y, basically what I'm doing is I'm writing y in front of parentheses. I'm crossing off my y's here. I'm dividing by y basically, and I'll end up with an x minus, in this case, there's still an imaginary 1 there, x minus 1. My last step is always the same. Once I get to this step and I wrote my y parentheses, I'll just divide everything by x minus 1. So my inverse, that's the symbol for inverse, would be negative 2x plus 1 over x minus 1. I have to remember that they told it to me as f of x, and they asked me to determine the inverse of f of x. So I need to, instead of writing the inverse of y, I need to write the inverse of f of x. But that is my answer. Right here. Now, this step confuses people. Multiplying by the denominator doesn't usually confuse people. Distributing the x does not usually confuse people. Understanding that I need to move all of my y's to one side and my everything else to the other confuses students. If you like, you can think about it as just switching your 2x and your y. You can think about it as you still have your yx there, but now instead of 2x, you're going to switch them and change the sign. So instead of 2x, I'm switching it with the y, but I got to change the sign. And now instead of writing y, I'm going to write 2x and change the sign. And that's what you'll do. If you had yx minus 3x equals y plus 4, if you had that and you were thinking about it as just switching these terms so that you can have all your y's on one side, you would have yx, but now I'm going to write the y and I'm going to change its sign, and then I'm going to write the 3x, but it was negative, so I'm going to write it as positive. And that's that step. You're going to just switch the signs. And when you switch the signs, you'll switch the location. Another part that confuses people is when I'm here and I'm factoring out a y. If you had three yx minus 4y equaling 2x plus 1, if you had that, and you were at the step where you drew your y parentheses, you just write what's left when you cross off your y's. I have a 3x left here and a negative 4 left there. Usually that last step of dividing by the parentheses does not confuse people. But if it did confuse you, you'll just divide both sides by 3x minus 4, and you'd have the inverse equaling 2x plus 1 over 3x minus 4.